All right, so in this lecture, we are going to look at demand and supply, right? So this is what we are going to learn in this lecture, right? So in this lecture, so there are the following concepts we are going to discuss. We will start to learn or to understand different type of market. And as you're going to see, we are going to focus on competitive market. I'm going to explain to you what is competitive market. And then, so we're going to look at supply and demand separately, okay? And so I want to emphasize when we look at supply and demand, so we take the price as given, meaning so we don't have clue where the price coming from. We just take the price as the exogenous given and see how quantity demand and quantity supply will respond to price change, right? And then after that, so we're going to look at a equilibrium price and a quantity model. And from there, we are going to learn how the price will determine or where the price comes from. And then with that model, we can study some interesting economic phenomena. Okay, like for example, the scarcity of skilled workers, right? Okay, now let's start with competitive market. So first of all, what is a market? The market is a place where buyers and the sellers, so they meet together. Right? Think about usually, so there's like Sundays farmers market, right? So that's where sellers and the buyers meet. Okay? And then also I want to think about market in a broader way. So market is not only a physical place where people meet. Market also includes some virtual place where people meet. Like say for example, eBay, right? Or say for example, the Facebook marketplace. Okay, so that's where people meet, right? All right, so this is the market. But now what is a competitive market? So competitive market, so there are many buyers and then many sellers. Okay, none of them can influence the price. Okay, how we understand that? This is like in an election, right? So your vote won't determine who's becomes the president, but your vote counts, right? Okay, so actually, so now I would like to draw a diagram to help you understand different type of market. Okay. So on the horizontal line, we have numbers of buyers. That's called B. Vertical line, we have numbers of sellers. That's called S. Okay, so here, so we have 1, start from 1. And then we have, this is infinity. All right? And similarly, 1 to infinity. What is a competitive market? Means we are here. Okay? And we are in a competitive market. Right? And so in this competitive market, there are many buyers and many sellers. Okay, none of them can influence the price. But again, as I just mentioned, so each of you will collectively determine the price. Now, there are other type of market. Let's start with here, okay, this corner. Okay. So there are very few sellers, sometimes 1 or 2 or 3, but it's very few. It's different from here. Oh, by the way, so competitive market, so there are plenty of examples. Most of our daily staples, so examples like groceries, so those are produced by or, so we are purchased in a competitive market, right? Just if you go to Walmart, just think about how many brands of waters they are available, or how many brands of sunscreens they are available, right? So or breads. Okay? So this is an example. So most of the goods we trade on our daily basis are in the competitive market. Now look at here, this corner. So you have a very few sellers, but still, so you have many buyers. All examples. So actually, this is called monopoly. Okay? Monopoly is the strong word, or the strong definition, meaning there's only one seller. But sometimes in your advanced microeconomics, like intermediate, you look at other type. This is including duopoly. All right, and then maybe monopoly, duopoly, right? But nevertheless, this just means you have very few sellers. Okay? Here there are examples. So think about OPPD. Okay? So that's pretty much the only sellers in the market that provide electricity, or MUD. Okay? Other example of monopoly, or duopoly, or oligopoly. So meaning there are few sellers. Think about internet providers, right? So in Omaha, so usually you have CenturyLink, Cox, or maybe one or two other smaller or bigger, whatever. So the internet providers, right? And then so also you can think about operation system. So usually, so these days you either choose Windows-based or Apple OS-based, right? And maybe a small fraction of people use Linux. So that's it. So what's the difference of this market versus this market? The difference here is that those sellers, so they have market power. So they have the ability to manipulate or control the price. But in reality, they may not allow to do that because there's a government regulation. But if there's in the absence of government, so usually they have the ability to manipulate the price, right? But this is no secret. Actually, Apple's iPhone sells with a high margin, right? Because their production cost for typical iPhone is probably like 300, but they can easily sell for 700, and they never on sale, meaning there's no discount. Okay, so this is an example, or what's the difference? So the seller, they can unilaterally affect the price. But in this market, in competitive market, so the seller has no such power. Now we go to this corner, right? So this is something less known or less studied. So here, so you have one or few buyers, but you have many sellers. And this is called monopoly. Okay? An example here, just think about something purchased by the government. Let's say, for example, Medicare. Okay? I'm not sure everyone familiar with Medicare. So Medicare is government-provided healthcare for elderly or for some disabled citizens. Okay? So this is Medicare, right? And then, so this Medicare, so we are talking about the healthcare market, right? Who are the buyers? Usually is government. Okay? So that's the only buyers. Who are the sellers? So usually those healthcare providers. Think about hospitals. Think about clinics, nursing homes, right? And then, so that is opposite to this market. So usually, so the buyers has market power. So they can decide the price, right? But again, so in reality, it's a little bit complicated because what happens? For those sellers, they may lobby, right? So they may lobby the government to pay a higher price, okay, or provide more generous terms for their purchase, right? So that's the thing, okay? But again, so most of the time, we live in this market. And for this class, we will focus on competitive market, right? So now let's back to the slide. Okay. So we understand what is competitive market. Our discussion will focus on competitive market, right? And then, so in this lecture, we will rely on supply and the demand model to understand how a competitive market behaves. All right. So in the future, if you study how other market behaves, say for example, monopoly. So you will still use supply and demand, but the behavior of supply and demand will be slightly different. So let's keep that in mind, right? Doesn't mean what we going to study in this lecture is not correct. It just means you need some advanced tools, or you need to change or tweak theory a little bit so that we understand other behavior, right? Now let's start with demand. Right? So demand, first of all, that represents the behavior of buyers. Remember, so we have buyers and sellers in the market. And so demand curve is defined as how the quantity demanded change with price. Okay? So this demand curve. Or in other words, demand curve shows us the relationship between price and let's call it QD, quantity demanded, right? So this is demand curve. Now the question is, what is quantity demanded or QD? So QD or quantity demanded is defined as the quantity that buyers willing to and able to purchase at a particular price. How do we understand that? Given the price, okay, quantity demanded, this QD, is buyer willing to and able to. Okay, so these are two separate concepts. I'm willing to buy, at the same time I'm able to purchase, like this background picture shows, right? So this old gentleman, look at him. So certainly he can afford to buy this scooter. There's no problem, right? So he's able to buy. But then, so is he willing to purchase? I would guess usually probably not, right? First, he doesn't derive much fun from riding a scooter. It doesn't look cool for him, for his age, right? He's rather to play golf. And second, there's like safety concern, right? Why would he just ride a scooter, right? So he is able to, but he's not willing to. So it could be the case for whatever price he may not want to buy, and he's not a potential buyer. Now think about other example for a teenager, right? So usually they want to have a fancy computer to play video games with some like fancy GPU inside. So they willing to buy if they have some pocket money. But unfortunately, most of the time they are not able to purchase because they don't have enough pocket money, right? So this other example. But then who are the potential buyers? Or what is the quantity demand means? It just means, okay, so I can afford, at the same time, I'm willing to pay for what I get. Okay? So this is quantity demanded. Now let's learn this demand curve through this numeric example. Okay? So we are going to look at a demand schedule. Essentially, it just shows us how quantity demanded on the right hand side of this table varies with price of the commodity. And here we look at cotton. But again, these are just abstract examples. So you can replace this cotton with whatever you like. Either is a cell phone. I mean, cell phone is my favorite example these days. So we spend a couple hours on my cell phone, right? Or you can say, okay, so this is a demand schedule for apple. I mean, the apple you eat every day, right? Or fruits. Okay, so you just replace with whatever you like. Now, without loss of generality, just say, okay, this is some commodity. Okay, so we can ignore this cotton. We can forget about this cotton. Just think about the commodity. At the price of 2, so this is a hypothetical demand. Okay. Now, when the price decline, and usually, so the quantity demand increase. Remember, so the quantity demanded is you're able to and you're willing to. So if you demand certain quantity at 2, meaning you're willing to buy. Now the price decline and it usually means you are able to buy more, right? Because you have more money to spend. per dollar term. And this trend will keep moving, right? So the lower the price, the higher the quantity demanded. And then, so what we did here is we just put those dots, say for example, this row corresponds to the dot here. So literally we just put those dots in the table onto or in this diagram. And then finally we connect those dots. Okay? And we have a curve, and this curve is called demand curve. And this demand curve just tells us how quantity demanded on the horizontal line will respond to changing price. But just keep in mind, as I mentioned at the very beginning, okay, so we look at demand. For the moment, we don't know where the price is coming from. We just say, okay, so if you give me the price, I'm going to tell you how people is going to respond by decide how many quantity you want to purchase. All right? But where the price coming from, we must wait once we finish the discussion of demand and supply separately. All right? Okay. Very good. Oh, by the way, so before I move, so I forgot one thing. So this curve is a downward slope. And this downward slope actually reflects the law of demand. And right now, actually, we have a slide to explain that. Law of demand. Lower the price, higher the quantity demanded. It's very intuitive because you can afford more. Right? Now, there's usual mistake we made, or there's something usually confuse you. Change in demand versus change in quantity demanded. What's the difference? Change in quantity demanded means, so we just leave the demand curve as it is, but there's a change in price. You're going to respond changing price by adjusting your quantity demanded. Or in other words, so the only thing cause a change in demand is price of the good itself. No, that's the only thing, right? The cell phone becomes cheaper, and then usually so the demand will increase, right? The electronic car become cheaper. Like Elon Musk recently announced they are going to have a cheaper version of, they haven't have the name yet, of 25,000, I believe. So this coming up in 2023. If that becomes reality, and then the demand for Tesla will increase, right? So we are responding to price. And here changing quantity demanded is solely caused by changing price of the commodity we are studying. But what's changing demand? So those are other factors. Okay? And what are those other factors? Let's wait and see. Okay? But that's in the graph. So this is how things different. On the right hand side, oh, by the way, so yeah, on the right hand side you have change in quantity demanded. So you see, so the curve is the same. We just move from this point to this point. Okay. Left hand side, so the curve moved from D1 to D2. Right? And then, so given the price, we move from here to here. Right? And by the way, so in these slides, I also want to explain to you what we mean increase in demand, and at the same time what we mean decrease in demand. Like here, so this is an increase in demand. Okay. Why? So here's how we understand this change. Price fixed at $1. The quantity demanded will increase from 10 to 15. So this certainly is an increase in demand. Now we can look at other way. So if you want to keep your demand at 15. Now let's see, so what the customer willing to pay. So before, the customer is only willing to pay, this price like we can extrapolate. So this is around 50 cents, right, under D1. If you price equal to 50 cents, and then I'm willing to demand 15. So that's under D1. Now under D2, so I'm willing to pay $1, or even price $1, I'm still want to demand 15. So that's another way to understand, oh, so this is an increase in demand. All right, okay. But then reversely, so if the curve shifts to the left, so that just means it's a decrease in demand, right? Okay, so this just summarizes what I just explained to you. Law of demand, high price leads people to demand smaller quantity, usually because your purchasing power declines, right? Okay, and then so here, again, just summarize what I just explained or reinforce. A decrease in demand is a leftward shift, okay? And why a leftward shift is a decrease in demand? There are two ways to understand. Okay, so you can imagine there is a curve cross this dot. Okay, this is our D2. Right? So at the same price, less quantity demanded. At the same quantity, lower willingness to pay. Right? We just compare this dot on D2 with this dot and this dot on D1. Right? By this comparison, so we understand D2 represent a decrease in demand. Right? Now on the other hand, so a shift to the right hand side means there's an increase in demand. I already explained that to you. Right? Let me just summarize or repeat what I said. Given the quantity, people willing to pay more. Given the price, people will demand more. Right? Okay. So now we are ready to understand the reason behind the change in demand. Okay, so this includes a decrease in demand and an increase in demand. Okay. So here we are going to study 5 different factors that can cause the demand curve to shift. Okay, let's see what are those 5 factors. First, change in price of related goods or service. And second is income, and then test expectation, the numbers of the consumers. Now let's go one by one, right? So in the following slides, let's go one by one. Start with change in price of, here is related goods. But in terms of related goods, they may have 2 different related goods. Okay, start with substitutes. Okay. How we understand substitutes? So essentially, so we are talking about 2 goods. So they offer similar function to the customer, right? And so before I go to the example on this slide, just think about in reality. So what are substitutes? Pepsi versus Coca-Cola, right? So that's substitutes for most people. McDonald's versus Burger King, right? For most people, for most of the case, particularly when you are hungry, so that's a substitute. When you're not hungry, you have become picky, so you may strongly prefer Burger King versus McDonald's, right? But usually, so they just offer similar taste at a similar price, right? Okay, so those are substitutes. Those are examples of substitutes. Now, in this background, or on the slides. So there's another example of substitutes. It's asks you what happens to demand for travel in Hawaii versus demand for traveling to Mexico. And first, we understand this is a substitute in the following sense. So Hawaii is tropical season, or tropical climate. They have beach, they have ocean, right? Mexico, some part of Mexico, like say for example, we had the chance to visit Cancun a few years ago. So that's considered similar to Hawaii, right? So in that sense, it's a substitute for most of the customers, or particularly for people from Midwest, right? We are not very picky in terms of ocean, right? On ground, there's warm weather with beach, with palm trees, is probably is good for us in the winter season, right? So in that sense, substitutes. All right. Now, what would happen if the safety costs of traveling to Mexico increase? So if due to COVID, or due to some terrorist concerns, or other reasons, right? And then, so what people are going to do? So usually first, they're going to respond by decrease the travel to Mexico, because this becomes expensive. Just think about the demand curve, or love demand. Now, what else they're going to do? They're going to respond by looking for some alternative, right? Because they have money to spend, they have vacation need to take, right? And in the winter days, so they prefer to go to a warm place. So now Mexico becomes too expensive to travel, and then there's a good alternative, and then the demand for travel in Hawaii naturally is going to increase, right? So as a matter of fact, so substitutes is defined as following. If a decrease in the price of one leads to a decrease in the demand for the other, right? Like in the case we just discussed. But you should realize, so opposite is true. If this increase in price of one leads to the increase of demand for the other, because you're looking for alternative, looking for something else can substitute for what are you going to forego, right? Like in the example. So the price of traveling to Mexico increased. And then so you're looking for alternative. And then the demand for traveling to Hawaii will increase. Vice versa. Okay? So this is substitute. Okay? Again, so the best way to understand or to remember the substitute is just think about examples instead of memorizing this definition, right? So the best way to understand is examples. Now, besides substitutes, we will see goods is called complements. Okay, what's complement? So in the simple way to understand that is, so usually you need to consume together. In this background picture, right? So this is a perfect example. So this car needs lots of gas, right? So in terms of mileage, so for 1 gallon, they probably only runs for 15 miles, right? So they need a lot of gas. So you demand this hammer, and then usually you demand gasoline. So this is just you consume all together, right? So the complement. And certainly we have this technical definition, as we just saw for substitutes. But the best way to understand or to remember substitutes versus complement is through examples. Okay? Let me first explain to you this sentence, and then I'll give you more examples. We say two goods are complements if a decrease in price of one goods leads to an increase in demand for the other, right? And why is that? Is because, okay, so decrease in price of one goods. So first, the quantity demanded for that good will increase. All right, but now, because these two goods are complements, you consume all together, and then so the demand for the other must increase as well. In the background example, so the gasoline becomes cheaper, and usually the demand for car will increase. Or maybe the better way to say that is, if the car becomes cheaper, and then the demand for gasoline will increase. That probably is a more reasonable way to think about these complements, right? Now let me give you another example so that it's easier for you to remember what is complements. So for most of people, I would say probably over 99% of people, so wear two shoes, right? So your left-hand side shoes versus right-hand side shoes. So your left-hand side shoes and the right-hand side shoes is considered perfect complements. They are so perfect complement to each other in a sense, rarely, at least, I've never seen any store sell shoes separately. Like, for example, so first I buy left-hand side shoes, and then I buy right-hand side shoes. Okay, at least I never seen that. Okay? So this is a perfect example of complements. All right. So if you just cannot remember these technical terms, just think about that example. Your left-hand side shoes versus your right-hand side shoes, they are complements. You consume them together. Okay? Other examples, usually bread. Okay, so you consume together with peanut butter or jelly, right? So actually, usually, so they just put in a similar shelf or in the same area in a grocery store. So bread and peanut butter, so they are complements because usually you eat them together. But then, so in the same example, peanut butter and the jelly, so they are substitutes, right? Because you can either put peanut butter on your bread, make it tasty, or you can add jelly on your bread, right? So they are substitutes, right? But again, so some may have strong preference over peanut butter. Somebody else has strong preference over jelly. But usually for average person, so they are substitutes, right? Just add flavor, add the calorie in your bread, okay? So those are examples of substitutes and complements, right? So this is a first factor can cause the change in demand, right? But this depending on the goods we're talking about, are they substitutes or they are complements, right? Now the second factor is change in income. So in terms of change in income and its effect on the demand will depend on what type of goods you ask. Okay? So usually there are two types of goods. So their response in changing income will be very different, right? First is the normal goods. The normal goods, so most of the goods we consume on a daily basis are normal goods, right? So normal goods, its demand will increase when your income increase. You can afford more, right? So there are plenty of examples, like what we used: the computer, cell phone, cars, house, clothing, right? So those are normal goods. You want more when you can afford. But at certainty, there's a satiation point, meaning you feel that's enough, right? Okay, so for example, cars. For the ordinary person, so why you need a second car besides collection? Just for transportation purpose. One probably is enough, right? Just give example. And a cell phone. Why you need to carry 2 cell phones with you, right? Okay, again, so besides the purpose of a collection. So there's a satiation point, right? But certainly from 0 to 1 relies on your income, right? Okay, so this is normal goods. And then there are other type of goods, it's called inferior. So your demand over that goods will drop if your income increases. So you are going to choose something better. Like in this background picture, instant noodle is considered as inferior goods. Right? Instant noodle is cheap, is convenient, right? But it's not healthy. Okay? And so the more you eat, you just feel not tasty because it's just manufactured flavor, right? And then once your income increase, you prefer some fine food. So that's the example. Now, I want to ask you questions, or you can think about. So, do you think public transportation is a normal goods or inferior goods? This is a tricky question, right? So it really depends on where we live. Okay, in Omaha, or in general in cold weathers, or in like a city spread out, public transportation is definitely inferior goods, right? So it's not convenient, it's not reliable, and in the winter or in hot weather, it can be a pain to wait for your boss to come, right? But however, if we think about a big city, particularly like a European country, in say, for example, Paris or Zurich, that's where I used to live, okay? And so public transportation indeed is normal goods, right? Because the public transportation there is super reliable, comfortable, all right? And it is convenient because pretty much you can go anywhere via public transportation on time, on schedule, right? And why is you may wondering, so how come that becomes the normal goods? Isn't that everyone can afford? So actually, it's not necessarily affordable because it can be expensive. And what's the alternative, you may wondering? Okay, so actually, so there are people choose to walk or choose to bike because bike is cheaper compared to public transportation. Just to give you an example. So when I was living in Zurich, so if you want to buy a seasonal ticket for 1 year, it can easily cost you $1,000. Okay, and with $1,000, you can buy a very decent bag, right? And this bag lasts more than 1 year usually. So you can see, so in the margin, there are people choose to bike instead of take the public transportation, right? So just purely out of the price concern. Okay, maybe they have other concerns, for example, the environmental issue, right? Again, to summarize, change in income will affect demand, but depending on the nature of goods. And furthermore, a goods is normal goods or inferior goods, most of the time is very obvious, but some cases it's not that clear cut, like public transportation I just mentioned. Right, you want to keep that in mind. All right, third factor is change in taste. Right. So taste and the preference, so they are very subjective, right? And so they will vary among consumers. But then, so this change in taste or preference will have impact on demand. And like this background picture shows, right? So President Trump, so at some point, so he wants to show his image as wearing a face mask. Okay? So that would have impact on the demand for face mask. Right? Other example, seasonal change is going to have impact on demand, right? So in the winter, and then the demand for winter gills is going to increase. So that explains why Costco is going to change their goods on shelf according to the season. Right. Okay. Now we are going to move to the fourth factor, which is change in expectation. So here, this expectation including many things. Okay, so I want to highlight two expectations. One is the income. The other is the price, right? Okay, so now let's see. So if you are anticipating a particular product you would like to own, its price will decline due to the introduction of a new model, say with the iPhone. Because usually in September, iPhone is going to introduce a new model. Once a new model is introduced, the existing model will drop price. And Samsung did the same thing, but Samsung did in the spring, right? So whether you're a Samsung fan or iPhone fan, so just put yourself in that case. So if you want a new phone and you are anticipating the price of the model you want to buy is going to decline, what are you going to do? So a variety of people is going to plan your purchase, right? Because you knew, so wait for one more week, I will pay $100 less, or I save $100, right? So 1 week's waiting time gives me $100. Okay? So you can see, so this expectation is going to affect demand. On the other hand, so if everyone expecting the price is going to increase, like think about the recent housing market. So if we expecting, so the housing market is going to keep getting hotter and hotter, right? And then so you need a house, or your parents need a house. What are your parents going to do? So you may want to get hold of a house before the price becomes too expensive or unaffordable, right? So you can see the expectation of the price change will affect your demand. Now, on the other hand, your expectation on your income is going to affect your demand as well, right? As a college student, so before your graduation, or just sometimes around that time, you expecting you're going to find a job, so bring your stable income, right? And then so usually you are going to increase the demand for a certain type of normal goods. Think about you want to buy a better car, or you want to move into a nicer apartment, right? Buy some fancy clothes for your future jobs, right? Or some take a vacation to celebrate your incoming graduation. Okay? So those are the expectations affects your demand. Okay? So those the this is fourth factors, right? Now, before I explain to you further, let's just spend 1 minute to work on these practice questions. So let me give you 30 seconds to read, and then so we figure this out all together. All right. Right. Okay. So let's quickly go through these questions. when the price of petroleum goes up, and the question asks you what happens to demand for natural gas, coal, solar power, right? And here you just assume substitutes for petroleum. So they are substitutes in the sense they provide a good source of energy, right? Okay, and then the answer is naturally is going to be A, right? Because the price of this increase and the demand for this go down. You're looking for alternatives, and then so either natural gas or coal or solar power, right? Okay, so here, so we need to remember the principle I mentioned earlier, which is ceteris paribus, meaning there's no other factor change, right? So in reality, so the price of petroleum goes up, usually comes with more concern about climate change, right? Actually, or in other words, to say that is, so the concern about climate change so leads to an increase in petroleum because people don't want to use that, right? And so and then it's actually so the demand for those natural gas and coal, all those things will decrease, but maybe the solar power will increase. So if we think in that way, it's become too complicated. So that's why so here we apply this principle of ceteris paribus, which will say so the only thing matter is the price itself. Nothing else changed. People's preference taste, their expectation hasn't changed. So here we only look at how the price of petroleum affects the demand for other alternatives. All right, to simplify. Okay. The last factor that can cause change in demand is the numbers of consumers. Okay? And so in the United States, currently we are undergoing some significant demographic change. Okay? So the baby boomer generation is retiring. So our society becomes aging, right? So that is going to change the demand for certain type of goods. So for example, the demand for healthcare is going to increase. There is a large cohort of people retire, right? So they are going to need more people to take care, right? And the demand for smaller house will increase as well, because this baby boomer generation, they retire, they not need a big house anymore, right? And the aging population causes a big problem or a big challenge to our society, which is the dementia. Okay, you may or may not heard about dementia. Essentially, this is a mental disease. People start to forget about everything. Okay, and so this dementia usually is come with aging, right? So the older you get, the higher probability you are going to get dementia, right? So our society is become older, and then statistically, so you are going to expect more people to suffer from dementia. So dementia is different from regular mental disease or regular health problem. So it requires lots of attention from the caretakers. So in that sense, so the demand for skilled healthcare worker will increase in the following few decades. Right? So they just give you examples. So how the changed number of consumers is going to affect the demand. And furthermore, so the COVID-19 is going to have profound impact in the future demand. Okay, just name one out of few. So COVID-19, so the research study found so it has long-term impact on your brain. Okay, so what they call so because the virus change your brain in a very micro level. And so among COVID patients, the chance to develop dementia in the long term is significantly higher. Okay, not only dementia, maybe other mental issues like depression. Okay, so what that means? That means in 10 or 20 years times, so we are going to see increase. I don't know so what's going to be the scale yet. No one knows for the moment, but we know that this is going to happen. So this is going to increase in the prevalence of certain type of mental disease, and then the demand for cure or for healthcare provider is going to increase down the road. Right, so this gives you another examples how change in the number of consumers will change demand. Right. Okay, so there's another practice questions. So this one asks you which of the following will cause increase in the demand for cars. Right? So A, price of car tires increase. So actually this is going to lead to a demand decrease, right? Because the price of car tire increase and usually leads the car becomes more expensive, right? But how we understand the car tire increase because of a Malaysian rubber shortage? It's because rubber is the main input for car tires, right? So the shortage leads to the price of rubber increase, and then leads to the price of tire increase, and then leads to the price of the car increase, and then leads to demand decrease. So this is not correct. Now B, concrete steel reinforcing rods are replaced by aluminum along the Atlantic coast to prevent rusting. So now how do you understand this? So if this project needs more aluminum because they are replacing replacing rod with aluminum. So it means the demand of aluminum will increase, then the price of aluminum will increase. But the aluminum is what? Is the main input of car. Because most of the modern car, the main frame is made with aluminum. It's cheaper, it's more durable, and lighter, right? And then the price of the car will increase, and then the demand will decrease. So this is not correct. Okay? Now we go to the next one. Gasoline price drop. So this is correct. So the gasoline and the car usually is considered as complements. Okay. Last one. McDonald's increases hamburger production in response to consumer trend. So it has very little, almost nothing to do with autos. Okay, so they are independent. So the answer is C. Right? Okay, to finish the discussion on demand, so we are going to convert individual demand into market demand. So the individual demand is represented by demand curve for each individual, right? Like here. So this individual, quantity, price, and it follows the law of demand. Now, if we look at other individual, it should follow the same law of demand, right? And here we look at two individuals. That's going to represent many. This is a simplification, right? So think about the model, the definition of a model. Now, we use these two to represent many buyers in the market, and then we add them together. So we're going to get market demand. Now remember, so we use this simple summation. What this means? It means all the properties we discussed for individual demand curve will apply to market demand. What are the properties we discussed? We discussed law of demand. Okay? We have discussed the factors shift demand, right? We also differentiate between change in demand versus change in quantity demanded, right? So all those things will apply to market demand, because this is a simple summation. All right. So now we basically finished the discussion of demand. Before I show you the supply, let's watch these short videos. Okay? So when you watch these videos, just keep one question in mind. Why there's no such market exist for such important quote-unquote goods? And then, or furthermore, why there's no such market exist, even though there's a huge demand for this particular, again, quote-unquote goods. Okay? And then always think about the trade-off. Okay? So if we have the market, what will happen? What's the cost, what's the benefit? If we ban this market, what's the cost, what's the benefit? Okay, if you can think in that way, and then you have an answer why there's no such market for these super important, again, quote-unquote goods. Right?
Years is probably